Hi, this is Lydia Machova from languagementoring.com, and today I'm going to introduce an amazing method to you, which is called the Goldlist method, and it works really magically. It's used to learn vocabulary in a foreign language into your long-term memory by not trying to memorize anything. And this is a very important point. You are learning in the way that you're not trying to learn. It's kind of counterintuitive, right? But that's exactly how this method works. So in this video, I'm going to show you what this method is about, okay? Well, first of all, what you need is to get a beautiful, nice notebook. I always say this to the people I help with language learning because I think that to have a positive approach to the materials you use is kind of important. And usually girls in my lessons, in my classes go like, oh yes, absolutely, this is very important. Guys don't care that much, that's okay. I personally need to have a beautiful notebook to start with. Now, what you do is you write lists of words, of vocabulary into the notebook, and you write it in two columns, okay? The first one is in your language, in my case that would be Slovak, and the other column is in the language you want to learn. So I use this one for Russian, and as you can see, I wrote it in Russian as it's used in typing, not really the handwritten style. I don't like to use that one in Russian, but that doesn't matter. Anyway, you can also use the columns the other way around. It's not important that this one is on the right and this one is on the left, okay? What you do is you just write 20 words or expressions. I like to go with expressions. I'll explain later why this is important. You write them out in Russian, in Slovak, and then their translation in Russian. Okay, so I'll use the two languages which I use this with. And all you do is just write them out nicely, and then just read them out loud once. That's all you have to do on the first day. The second day, you do the same thing for another list, okay? So you create this list. These things are not here, okay? Don't pay attention to them right now. So you write another list of Russian expressions you want to learn, you translate them into your own language, and you close the book. You read them out loud. Once, you close the book and don't look at the words from yesterday. The third day, you do the same thing, okay? Again, you write a nice list and you translate it, read it out loud, and close the book. And this you keep doing for about 2 weeks. Not really about, at least 2 weeks, okay? Then after the 2 weeks, you get back to the first list which you created 2 weeks ago, and you know when it was because you have a little date written over here, okay? And you kind of test yourself on how well you know this vocabulary. Now, the author of the method, David James, also known as Uncle Davy on the internet, a well-known polyglot in the polyglot community, by the way, says that you don't really have to test yourself. You can just read the list of the words and you will find out which ones you know and which ones you don't. I personally like to test myself to really be sure that I know the vocabulary. So I test myself by covering the Russian expressions and going line by line and checking if I'm able to translate it into Russian, because if I'm not, I feel like maybe I will not be able to use the expression actively later, okay? So I always test myself to be absolutely sure. And the interesting thing is that when you do this, when you really did not look at the words for at least 2 weeks, you'll see that you somehow remember 30% of the list from 2 weeks ago. And this is where the magic really happens. This is what I love about the method. I don't really know how it works, but your brain picks about 30% of those expressions and puts them into the long-term memory. And you see, the main thing about this method is that you cannot really make your brain learn anything. You cannot cram things into the long-term memory. You can do it with a short-term memory. Yeah, that works. And we all know it because when we studied for exams or something, we're trying to just learn by memory. And it worked for the exam, but then 2 weeks or 2 months later, we usually don't remember that much, right? Well, with this method, it's different because you test yourself on what is left in your long-term memory after 2 weeks, which means that if it stayed there after those 2 weeks, that means it must be in your long-term memory and not the short-term memory, right? So this is where you see how the method works. Now, what do? You kind of pick the 30% of the words which you know, and the rest of the words, you just rewrite it on the other side of this double page, okay? So this list is the same expressions as here, but it's shorter, as you can see, because out of the 20 words I wrote here, I only have to rewrite 14, because I find out that I kind of remembered 6 expressions, 6 lines from the list that I made 2 weeks ago. Okay, the next day, so this was on the 14th day, and the next day you do the same thing with another list. Okay, so we started here, and then we do it for the list we wrote 2 weeks ago, etc., etc. Okay, so you continue like that, and you always check on how much you remembered, and the words which you remembered, you just kind of throw away. You don't rewrite them anymore. You take them out of your distilling process, because this is called distilling the vocabulary. And then with the rest of the words, all you do is you rewrite them, okay? Now, besides that, you also keep doing new lists. So on the 14th day, I did not just look back at the original first list, but I also continued in creating new and new lists, okay? And that means that in 2 weeks from today, I will have, again, a list, or a distillation and a list, which I did 2 weeks ago. So I go back to it, and if I see that this date here, this is the date of the distillation, if I see it was at least 2 weeks ago, then I do the same thing. I check how many of these words I remember, and I will see that I will remember 30% of them. I will have them in my long-term memory, and I will just rewrite the rest of the words, the expressions over here. Okay? So all this method is about rewriting the words which we do not remember yet. We do the same thing after 2 weeks from this list, from this distillation, we rewrite it over here. And this is how you continue on every page in the book. You kind of distill the vocabulary over and over again. And the question now is, what happens with these words, right? I still don't remember 70% of them. So what I do is I continue in the back of the book, for example, okay? You can use another notebook if you like, or I like to use the same one. I take those expressions which I had over here, in the previous book. This was the bronze book, and now I create the silver book. So I can distill this vocabulary over and over again, okay? And when I feel like I still want to work with this vocabulary because I don't remember it yet, I can take another notebook and create the gold list, okay? And this is where the name of the method comes from. So you distill the vocabulary 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times. And if there are some words which you don't remember after those 9 times, then probably you're just not meant to know them, right? I mean, we cannot remember everything. And if you met this expression after 2 weeks for 9 times and you still don't know it, you still cannot remember it, then your brain clearly has a problem with that. So just forget about that. But you will see, actually, based on my experience, that you don't need to distill all the way back to the gold list, because I usually just work with the bronze book, and that's perfectly fine for me, because I realized that whenever I started the silver book, I never continued with it for very long. I mean, here you can see I have maybe 2 or 3 lists, but I don't distill them any further, because when I check how many I remembered or not, I do these little tick signs, you see that there's just a few dots, which is the expressions I had a problem translating, and that's just not worth the time for me. I will rather concentrate on new lists and distilling them so that I learn more vocabulary like that. You see? So this is what the Goldlist method is about. It's basically rewriting after at least 2 weeks. It can be longer than 2 weeks, doesn't need to be exactly 2 weeks, but it needs to be at least 2 weeks, because if you do it earlier than 2 weeks from when you first wrote the list or when you wrote the distillation, then your short-term memory is going to jump in, and it's going to look like you know all the words, If I wrote the list and did the test the next day, I would probably remember 90% of the words. I mean, my short-term memory is probably pretty good, so that would work, but not in the long-term memory. And this is a very simple way how you can learn lots of vocabulary in a very easy, pleasant way, and you can just do one list a day, or you can do several distillations at the same time. It's totally up to you. You can even do several new head lists every day, so you can do one, then take a 10-minute break, because your brain might get tired and you don't feel that. We don't know when the brain is tired, so we need to give it a rest, just to be sure. And then you do the next page, you know, the next list, and then the next page, etc., etc. You can do 10 lists a day if you like. And it doesn't need to be 20 words. I use 20. David James, the author of the method, says he works with 25. But I rarely ever find notebooks which are big enough to fit in 25 words in one list. So that's why I go for 20. It doesn't really matter. Just go for 30% which you don't rewrite and 70% which you rewrite. And this is how the method works, really, really magically. And I totally recommend you to try it out. And in the next video, I'm going to show you more details about how this method works, why there are so many numbers, you know, in all the lists, and why there are different colors, etc. And what happens if I find out that I don't remember the 30%, you know, or this list is too difficult or maybe too easy, okay? So tomorrow we're going to discuss the details of this method. See you tomorrow.